Welcome back to the official Big Bang Theory podcast. I am your host, Jessica Radloff. We have another great episode coming right at you. So our next guest today is what I call one of the OGs of the Big Bang Theory. And this is a rarity because there was a lot of turnover in seasons 1 and 2 of the Big Bang Theory. So for someone to have stayed through the entire run of the series, like that is a unicorn. That is a special individual. So that's why I am so excited to have the wonderful Dave Goetsch here with us today, who started off as a co-executive producer, worked his way up to executive producer, and was also the reason behind why Sheldon dressed as the Doppler effect in the Middle Earth paradigm, which comes in a couple episodes later from what we're going to talk about today, episode 6, I think it is, of season 1. He's the reason that we saw Sheldon is the Doppler effect. You are a legend, Dave Goetsch. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm a legend now. Now that I'm on the podcast, I can officially become a legend. So thank you for making it possible.
Also, this is really funny. It's actually the first time we have met kind of in person. I've been to your house to drop off the Big Bang Theory book. We have
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. We have emailed, of course, but this is really the first time in person. So it's so great to have you here. You also look like, I know Big Bang started now at this point, 17 years ago? You must have been 10 years old because I'm looking at you and I'm like, I don't know how old you are, but you look like you must have started when you were 10.
The trick is to work in a writer's room indoors and work in a soundstage indoors and be on a show for 12 years where you never go outside.
Never see the sun, and it's cold on stage, so it's like, you're well kept, like in a freezer.
Yeah, exactly. Chuck often said that the show was an indoor cat.
Yes.
So didn't like to go outside and shoot. So a lot of ancillary benefits.
Before we jump into this episode, tell our listeners how you came to get your job on the Big Bang Theory.
So I had started my career on Third Rock from the Sun. I started as a staff writer, worked my way up to being a showrunner with my writing partner at the time, and Christine Zander, and then did a bunch of pilots, and nothing ever happened. And by the time I read the Big Bang Theory pilot, it just leapt off the page for me because I thought, oh my God, this is the show I've been trying to make and I haven't been able to do it. And so I told my CA agents, I said, just please get me a meeting. And I got to meet with Bill first, and then I met with Bill and Chuck, and I was like, you guys, you did it. Like, this is so hard to do, and you did it. And I just knew that you had to kind of bring your nerd creds right to the meeting.
Yes.
So I was like, look, my roommate from college is a mechanical engineer who had his senior project on the space shuttle, and he also, like, this beautiful woman in college once asked him up to for coffee, and he was like, I don't drink coffee, and then went home and realized, like, oh my God. And another friend of mine is a neuroscientist, and then I told him that in college I was at a costume party, and I wore an all black outfit that had stripes of tape that were closer together and farther apart, and that I was the Doppler effect, and I got drunk and I ran around the room going, wow. And so then so that apparently was enough. That got me there.
Thank God. How could that not? That's such a perfect story. If they did not go with you, I would have really wondered, what are they looking for then? Because you are perfect.
Well, that's so nice of you to say. Many people could have done that show, and I just feel so lucky. Obviously luck is a big part of it. And so to be there at that time, and I never knew if the show was you don't know if the show is going to be successful or not, but I knew from that script. And then when I saw the pilot with the cast, I was like, this has it, and this is the magic. And if somehow we get lucky and we don't screw it up, it's going to be great.
It's going to go. So I love your Third Rock from the Sun background because Jimmy Burrows was on a couple episodes ago on the podcast, and he was talking about how he directed Third Rock from the Sun. And when he read the script for Big Bang, the only thing he could really compare it to were the characters from Third Rock from the Sun, because otherwise he's like, we really hadn't seen this dynamic exist before on screen for the most part. So,
yeah, absolutely. To have this cadre of people who feel like total outsiders being pulled out into the world, and this one female character, like obviously Jane Curtin and Kayla Cuoco, are so incredibly different, but they're both brilliant actors, and that dynamic definitely resonated with me. And when I saw Jim, I thought, oh my God, this guy is as versatile as John Lithgow.
Yeah.
You know, and like
high praise.
What a dream to write for him and then for everybody in the cast.
Yeah. When I go back and watch the episodes on Max, I'm always struck by just how well formed the character of Sheldon was that early on. Like usually it takes a little bit to figure out who this character is for a lot of shows. You know, they got to find their footing, but he was such a well-established character right from the start.
It's incredible. And I have a theory about something that contributed to that, which is that they had to do the pilot twice.
Right.
They lived with those characters for 2 years. And one thing the first time I heard that, I thought, that's what they did on Third Rock from the Sun. There were 2 pilots over 2 years.
That's right.
And they even switched networks. Third Rock started on ABC and then went to NBC. And it's, to me, that's no surprise. How can you get lightning in a bottle, right? And it's to have 2 shots at it gives you the chance to adjust and kind of get it right. And that pilot is great.
It's so good. Today, we are going to talk about a very early episode, season 1, episode 3, The Fuzzy Boots Corollary. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Corollary. It's not an easy word.
It's not an easy word, no.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds it, but when I look at it in the print, I'm like, okay, do I have that right?
And we never thought anyone was going to see these names because even back then, it was maybe showing up on DVRs, but this is before streaming. This is before everyone's looking at IMDb, so you don't even really know. When I worked on Third Rock from the Sun, the title of every episode has the word Dick in it, just because it was funny that there's a character named Dick.
Oh my God, that's right.
That was. So you never know what's going to turn into.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. Is that, now in the age of streaming, we see the titles on everything, but back then, no. It was just based on, whatever we remember the episode for. This one aired on October 8th, 2007, directed by Mark Sandrowski. And the logline is that Leonard witnesses Penny kissing another guy, which causes him to completely spiral and go through a hard time. And as a result, Sheldon convinces Leonard that he should ask Penny out, even though Penny doesn't realize that she's actually going on a date with Leonard. And this episode is also notable because it's Sara Gilbert's first episode as Leslie Winkle. And it was only one scene. Like, she would have a much bigger role after this episode. But yeah, this was her first one too. When you were watching it last night, what came to mind? What memories were brought up for you?
Well, whenever I watch a TV show that I've been involved in, I'm picturing kind of what I was doing at the time or where we were in the offices or what were going on. And so this is the third episode that aired. Yeah. But they spent 2 years working on the pilot. So this is the second episode as a writing staff that we wrote together. Yeah. And this, as you know, was an all group written show based on the way Chuck had done it before. And that was new for all of us. And so much of it was us just trying to get a handle on what was working. But also, Chuck is a relentless iterator. There's that tech word of ideation, like make it better, make it better. He's constantly doing that. And so watching it, I wasn't surprised that there was one scene with Leslie Winkle because my memory and my sense of having worked with him over the years is he wants to see what works and not get tied to it. So if he had tons of confidence in Sara and Johnny, obviously, but what happens, not just when the writers and the actors see these two people together, but what does the audience think? Right? Like, does it take you out of it to see that? And it didn't. And she did a different thing and he was doing a different thing. And I think that actually made it extra charming. And there was this meta quality to it. And there's quite a deep connection between Roseanne and the Big Bang Theory, not just because Chuck was a writer on it and Johnny was an actor on it, but also Mary Quigley, and she was such a big part doing costumes for for Roseanne and also for Big Bang, and then later Laurie Metcalf, and then that leads to young Sheldon, and it's like there are these. It's kind of this like DNA that gets remixed, or I don't know, however you want to say it. But
and it's really
cool.
interesting and neat. And Sara Gilbert's going to come on for episode 5, which is the cello episode, as I like to call it, when she and Johnny's characters, Leonard and Leslie, basically it's like the foreplay, but they use it with the cellos. And that's when we really get to see this dynamic, which is fun. So I'm excited to see what she has to say when she comes on for that episode.
She's so talented and so amazing. And that was one of the things where, you know, Chuck kind of has these, like, it's almost like a rep company.
Yeah.
Where, you know, it's like he's worked on all these shows with all these people. And so even how you see on, you know, actors who've been in other versions of his show who end up like Rachel Bay Jones was on United States of Al, and he loved her in that. And so then it's like, oh, well, if there's an opportunity to use her again in this new show, then it's just wonderful how you get that chance to do that.
Yeah. 1,000%. The episode starts off with the guys playing World of Warcraft as they attempt to retrieve the Sword of Azeroth. I'm going to take a guess, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, that Jim, Johnny, Kunal, and Simon had no idea what this game was about. And I say that only because I know all 4 guys, but I'm going to say they had no idea what they were doing. But tell me if I'm right on that. And what do you remember about bringing the scene to life?
Well, one of the things that's fun when we would be watching them play, and sometimes they wouldn't necessarily know because they'd be playing different kinds of games. And there's also like maybe some of them were even fictional games or whatever. But sometimes you'd see them like hit really hard on a key or say in a way where you're like, well, I don't know what game you're playing, but that's not exactly what's happening.
Right.
And I was certainly no pro on World of Warcraft, but they were all game, and they're actors, right? So it's like, we can do it.
That's how good they are, that they could do that convincingly.
It would come out when we would go to Comic-Con, and there might be a question in Hall H to thousands of people.
Right.
And I think there were some times where one of them would be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't play video games. Or, you know,
they played Guitar Hero. Just that was what they did in the dressing room, but that might have been the extent of it. So.
Yes, exactly. And then Kunal, I believe, still plays games. Like he, you know, there's definitely like part of that. But it was definitely a new thing for them. And, you know, like, remember 2007, nobody had iPhones.
Right.
Like Wi-Fi hadn't been around for that long, like in terms of like what this stuff was and what was going on. So I think there hadn't been a lot of scenes of, you know, on TV of people doing that.
Right.
And there obviously was like this big cohort, and then when Maria Ferrari later joined the show, she joined the game. It was a game, right? Yeah. She has wonderful stories of like playing that with her then later husband, and like part of their dating involved like what was going on in World of Warcraft. And I remember she told a story to Bill Prady when she was coming on staff about that. And so that there's definitely another part of that which is all like baked into the show.
Absolutely. In this episode, after this scene, we meet Penny's new guy, Doug. And as I was rewatching it on Max the other night, I had to laugh because this is so a 2007 type of guy with the like frosted tips in his hair and the t-shirt and the physique. Like it just, I mean, it just was so funny to go back and look, and he's tan and even
right, because
Leonard,
you're like, how did they get that 2007 look?
I know. You're
well,
like,
actually,
wait,
it was 2007.
Yes, exactly. And even Leonard calls him kind of dreamy, which is really funny because Leonard sees this guy. By the way, I went on a deep rabbit hole here. His name is Alan Neighbors. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. The actor that played Doug.
I think so, yeah.
And as I was looking at his Instagram page, he does professional show jumping training and sales for horses.
Really?
Yes. I think this is the guy, but I went down a deep rabbit hole.
He and Kaylee had a lot to talk about.
Yeah, seriously. But yeah, with all these horses, I'm like, this pretty much looks like the same guy.
That's so interesting.
And yeah, I was like, because I love to see like, where are they now after all these years?
I like to just think that it's all one show. So I like to think that like when an actor is like, it's still Jim when he's in our town.
Yes.
We were still like, oh, look at Sheldon. He's living in a small town in 2000, in 1908 or whatever it
yes,
is.
It's so true. Look at Bernadette. She's a judge now,
She's a
going
judge
by the
now.
name of Abby Stone on
Good
Night
for
Court.
her. Good for her.
Yeah, good cosplay there. So yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. Anyway, so in this episode, Leonard knows he needs to move on from Penny now that he sees her with another guy. Like we had Kurt and we had now this guy, Doug. So Sheldon suggests that Leonard should go out with Leslie Winkle since he's noticed that she is shaving her legs, thereby assuming, quote, she's signaling sexual availability.
Which is not, I mean, that shows that Sheldon's trying to help.
Yeah.
Right? He's trying to help in his own way. And he's also observed some stuff.
Yes.
And he may or may not be wrong.
Yeah. So true. What do you guys remember? And I know this was such the early days. This is only technically the second episode that you're there for with this new group or the group that would assemble for the writer's room in season 1. What do you remember about either the pressure you guys might have felt of bringing Sara in? Because as we just talked about, people know her as Darlene from Roseanne. So was there a lot of pressure, if you remember, going into putting that scene together?
So always tons of pressure.
Yeah.
Like, no matter whether she's there or not.
Right.
Always tons of pressure. I think one of the challenges was that Chuck knew her and had worked with her. And so he might have had an idea kind of what he wanted. But also he's always open, it's like the best joke should win. So whatever works. I think, we were all trying to find that balance of like what's different and not. And it's interesting because Johnny, in doing the pilot twice, he had so much time to think about Leonard. And I think that served the show incredibly well. Yeah. Also with Jim, like the nuances he's doing, the looks he's making, how he's kind of squinting with his glasses, what he's doing in this episode, the third episode, he's doing in the 250th. You know, like it's just amazing how that's like fully formed. Yeah. And so then you see, what's cool about episodic television is you bring in other characters and then you see what happens and like what percolates and I think even after the episode was done, one of the things that I learned is just because it went well doesn't mean, well, let's bring her back again, or let's make a deal for 6 out of 12, or, Chuck is so intentional in trying to slow play this because he wants it to go for a long time. Right. He doesn't want to miss a moment. Right. And that was one of the early lessons that I had, which is you might pitch something and it could, in the joke, you're kind of setting canon, or you're saying, hey, that person's brother or sister or whatever. And if I remember there'd be some early conversations about like this character's mother or father, or, is what happened to Howard's dad or whatever it was. Yeah. And then it would help me to know so that I could pitch around that. But what I later realized in like one of the superpowers of Chuck is it doesn't help him because he wants later to be able to decide if there's one way or another. So this is being in the third episode, we're still as a staff like learning not like the process, but also we're all learning these characters in the show. And then I think this episode's shot probably in late August. So it's before the show airs. Right. So the audience the audience comes in, they've heard about this show, they've maybe heard a show, they've maybe seen a billboard, and they watched the pilot beforehand, and now they watch the show. Right. So that experience is totally different from what happens the following season, where I'm a fan, I'm in LA, I want to come to see the taping, I'm so excited, I see them. That energy is different. And it's so important to kind of remember that, because you have, like, what does a good season 1 taping feel like? Right. It feels different than a season 7. Yes. And and how do you modulate that? And because of Chuck's experience, he'd like been through that so many times.
Well, you bring up a good point, because I remember Chuck was here for the unaired pilot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool.
On our podcast. And he was talking about, because there was another female character played by Aretha Barr who was in that episode with the Katie character who then became Penny. And I asked him, I was like, how come you didn't bring back that second female character for the actual show when you got a second chance? And he said, he's
question.
like, we did play around with it in terms of we wanted another science type character, but we were trying to figure it out. And I think that's where Leslie Winkle came in. And obviously Sara will be able to share some more insight on this if she knows it. But I think they were trying to figure out, like, who could this other character be that might fill that role that we originally envisioned? Because then, you had Sarah Rue's character who played another, she was a doctor in this instance. And you were trying different things out because you don't know with a show like this. You want to see what works and how the audience responds. So it's a very good point that you bring up with that.
And one more thing is that in that first season, you're using these guest characters to be foils for your main characters. You want the audience to fall in love with these characters. So how can you do it? And it's not surprising that he does it for one scene, because that can drive Leonard back to Penny. Then now you've got the core characters.
Totally.
You've got time to bring her back, but it's a testament to also, like Sara and Chuck and the trust, which is if you get a call and you're like, hey, can I have you on one scene?
Yeah.
Like an agent might be like, no. What's the character? Pitch me this, pitch me that, whatever.
I was
but
wondering
he's in
that.
Service of the bigger picture, which is every episode, how do we make the audience fall a little bit more in love with our core characters? And then you have Amy and Bernadette and those other folks who eventually become core characters.
Yeah.
But it's not surprising to me that they show up years later.
Right.
Because you need this foundation. And it's a common mistake of less experienced people than Chuck to bring more in and add or to, like, hey, we've seen this character do this, let's flip that character around. And you're like, no, we don't even know who that character is.
Right.
Like, we have to understand Leonard, and then we can't have Leonard date Penny too soon because we need to know how much he cares about her and how he pines for her and the struggle of it.
Exactly. Well, in this episode, in this one scene we get with Sara Gilbert, it's a big scene though. They're in the lab together, and Leonard decides to ask her on a date, but they deal with a lot of scientific terms about variables and is this going to work? And then eventually they kiss, and Leslie says she does not feel anything. And then that's it. And it doesn't seem like this could go anywhere. We later know that it does. It picks up steam a little bit more. So Leonard comes home dejected, and he is just like, I don't know what to do. Howard suggests he would have greater success meeting women at a Latin dance class. And all the guys go to a class and start moving their hips. And it's very funny. And I was wondering how that story came about, because it's only one scene, but they're in this dance class with these ladies and just shaking their hips. What do you remember from that?
So I don't recall. I don't have the memory to know who pitched what.
Yeah.
But what my memory of stories like that too are, you're breaking this story, you're writing it in different ways, there are different versions of it.
Right.
Sometimes you do a whole second act, which is like the dance thing, and you meet somebody at the dance and whatever.
Yeah.
And then Chuck would just pull it back to say, like, well, there's one funny scene, why don't you just go to that?
Yeah.
And so there's like a maple syrup to turning sap to syrup quality to it, of like distilling it, and he always wanted to get to it and not risk losing the audience tuning or doing something else. And then the other thing that comes to mind about that lab scene is those would always involve David Salzberg, because we'd want to make it be accurate, and if there was anything on the boards, and he would come in and work and do all the stuff that we didn't even know about. So, and the same thing with the Latin dance class, we'd get a choreographer in to work all this stuff. And then one of the joys of working on a multicam sitcom is as a writer, you're in your office breaking the next story, writing a couple episodes later, rewriting, doing whatever it is, waiting for the run through. Sandrowski's got the actors, they're working on all this stuff. And they've spent a good chunk of the morning dancing, and they're working their lines, and you see them beforehand kind of like checking and doing this.
Right.
And it's delightful.
It's such a random job. Like, I would think, like, such a fun job that you guys do, but also so random to be like working on breaking out another episode and then come down to stage and like you see the actors doing, salsa dancing lessons or whatever it is.
Yes, and having potentially multiple shows in your head.
Right.
Which I have no idea how Chuck was able to jump, because those days he was jumping from 2.5 Men to Big Bang.
Yeah.
And then there was this crazy period when it was like, there was one tape night was Big Bang, one tape night was 2.5 Men, one was Mike
Mom,
and Molly and Mom. Like, maybe there were 4 tape nights that he was going to. So that's just unimaginable.
It's crazy. I'm stressed out just thinking about it. So later, Sheldon tells a very depressed Leonard, and I thought this was very insightful for Sheldon of all people. But he says to Leonard, listen, Penny has never actually rejected you because you've never actually asked her out. And Leonard is like, oh, yeah, that's right. So he goes over to her apartment, kind of asks her out. She thinks that, he's asking her to have dinner with him and the 3 other guys. So she's all for it. And of course, Leonard is freaking out because he's like, he's not going to tell her, no, it's just you and I. But she thinks that she's going with the 4 of them. And what I love so much about this episode, because God, it's so true. So Leonard comes out 2 hours before his date, dressed and ready to go. He has sweated through his entire shirt and outfit. And it's like the poor guy, like, I mean,
And what's funny about when those scenes happen is there are lots of discussions of like, should there be more sweat?
Right.
Should we pull the sweat back? And you have 5 different shirts, and then somebody runs over and like sprays some more or whatever.
Yes.
It seems like that there's like, does the sweat touch? There's always this question of like, is it just here? Like,
right. Is it all over?
Like
but no, I laughed so hard at that because I'm the kind of person, like, I'll sweat, and people say, like, are you nervous? And I'm like, no, it's not nerves, it's adrenaline. Whether I'll never forget, like, when my first episode of this podcast with Chuck and Peter Roth, I was like, what can I wear that doesn't show how much I'm sweating? And again, it wasn't exactly nerves.
That's for the podcast about the podcast.
That's the podcast about the behind the scenes of the podcast. But I was like, it's the adrenaline of doing it and wanting it to go well. And it's just like, oh my God, like this is so annoying. The dry cleaning bill that I have is just astronomical. So I loved that they showed this moment, and you need to go watch it on Max to fully appreciate the visual of it. But I want to listen to the clip when Leonard just starts to have a complete meltdown leading up to this supposed date with Penny. So let's listen to this.
I mean, I'm a perfectly nice guy. There's no reason we couldn't go to the restaurant and have a lovely dinner. Maybe take a walk afterwards. Talk about things we have in common. You love pottery? I love pottery. There's a pause. We both know what's happening. I lean in. We kiss. It's a little tentative at first, but then I realize she's kissing me back. She's biting my lower lip. She wants me. This thing is going the distance. We're going to have sex. Oh, God. Oh, my God.
Is the sex starting now?
I'm having a panic attack.
It's so amazing that first of all, what a great performance by Galecki, right? Like,
so good.
He's so in it, and then he gets wound up, and it's just so lovable. And Sheldon's not being a jerk, right? That's one of the things too, which is like, why would that guy, like, how does this audience fall in love with this guy? Which is, he's trying the best he can. He's paying attention. He's listening. He's watching. And then he has a very sincere question at the end.
At the end. It's so true. And you know what I was also thinking, Dave, as I was watching this, and I feel like this could have happened in later seasons once the characters were even more established. I felt like, where's Leonard's inhaler in this moment? Because this would have been the perfect time for him to just bring it out and start using it. Like when he did that scene, it was the Valentine's Day episode when Leonard and Penny were dancing and doing their whole, like, I think they were in costume too. And then eventually he has to get the inhaler out because it's too much for him. And I'm like, oh my God, this is such an inhaler moment for him because he's full on having a panic attack. But the way that it just keeps elevating in the scene is so good. Like you said, you got to go back and watch it.
And, you know, I remember that those are, in order to get to a scene like that, what happens in a writer's room is everyone tells stories about their terrible dating experiences. And so this is like, we're writing this episode maybe 6 weeks after we've met. And so that is this, there's like a group therapy quality to it. You want your story to trigger a thought or a joke or whatever, and you want it to be real and be based in reality. And so that's another like wonderful thing about being in the Big Bang Writers Room is that we get to know everybody very quickly because you have to share your stories, and they're often like embarrassing, you know, dating
Okay, so
stories.
who was the sweater in the writer's room? Now that I've admitted myself, who was the sweater in the writer's room?
I don't think it was just one.
Okay.
I don't know.
I feel better.
But it definitely could have been me. And then I think everybody had some version of that. And then even Adam, who was a writer's assistant and later writer, he would have...
Faberman, is that his name?
Adam
Okay,
Faberman would have extra T-shirts because sometimes he'd be so stressed out when Chuck would come into the room that he would sweat through a T-shirt, and so then he would have like a emergency T-shirt.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. God bless Adam Faberman. I think that is fantastic.
Totally.
I appreciate the prep and the thoughtfulness of thinking that out.
What a pro move. Pro writer's assistant move.
So true.
Yeah.
So, that is too damn good. I love that. Well, Leonard and Penny go to dinner and they sit at a table for more than two people, which poor Leonard, like, you know, he just is thinking like, how do I get out of this, but make it make sense? He has changed shirts. Thank goodness. Maybe that was an Adam Faberman idea that he made sure to do that. And Leonard shows Penny a physics trick with an olive in a glass. And then the olive falls to the floor and he goes underneath the table, ends up hitting his head, starts bleeding. Apparently he throws up. We don't see that one. And they leave the date. Did this happen to anybody in the writer's room?
So I don't remember that anything specifically happened like that. But I mean, it was funny because one of my memories of that too is that, you know, Chuck's experience was like in a rock and roll band, and he wasn't a nerd in the way that like us, like we thought he had more game, you know, than us. So there was definitely a kind of like a sense of like, no, it can be really bad. It can, like things, you know, how bad can it go? It can go so badly.
Yes.
And I think that that probably is like a combination of a bunch of people's experiences, and then the off-screen vomiting is always good because you don't see it, but you get the joke from it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Have you ever done that science trick, by the way, or the physics trick with the, like, you take a glass with an olive and then try to, what Leonard does?
I did it afterwards.
You did?
I did it afterwards. And it worked, and I didn't get hurt. But yeah.
Good for you.
And I think that Salzberg also showed it to us. He might have showed it to us in the writer's room.
Yeah. It was a fun trick. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. I need to try this later tonight.
Yeah. And so that's also one of the other fun things is that the internet was very much also our friend, because we'd be like, well, what are tricks and what are cool things? And that became really helpful.
Yeah. Well, it was also a fun icebreaker for Leonard and Penny because their conversation doesn't exactly flow.
Yes.
So, you know, that's when you resort to a science trick.
Go straight to science.
And it works out great. Speaking of great, in the end, after poor Leonard deals with throwing up and you know, bleeding and everything else, he comes home from the date and Sheldon asks him, how was it? And he goes, it was great. Like, this was in his mind such a success. And even though, of course, well, it's another couple episodes until we get to the Halloween one where they share this premature kids almost, but it sets it up also for there's something there still with these two, and you don't know what's going to happen, but there's something more to explore there.
Yes, and also I think it underscores Leonard's unbelievably low expectations. Right. And so just be like, I got to go to dinner with this like beautiful woman who I'm totally in love with. She talked to me. That was amazing.
Yeah.
The vomiting and the blood and the other stuff is like whatever. Yeah, totally.
So true.
That's secondary to the fact that I'm going to see her tomorrow when we walk down the stairs.
Right. I also forgot watching this episode how little Raj and Wolowitz are in it. I miss these guys in it. Like, they're so talented, and you think, I was so invested, of course, with Leonard's quest to see if Penny will go out with him. But I was like, gosh, at the end of it, I'm like, wait, we barely saw Wolowitz and Koothrappali, and I missed them. Like, you know?
And I think that in those, people sometimes say that the first 6 of your season 1 are supposed to be just the pilot over and over and over again.
I never heard that before. That's really interesting.
Or at least like reinforcing those core dynamics.
Yeah.
So that episode is very much about the triangle of Leonard, Penny, and Sheldon.
Yes.
And Sheldon being really an instigator. Why don't you go on? You haven't dated her. What about Leslie Winkle? So what happens when Leonard takes Sheldon's advice?
Right.
And I think there probably wasn't room for like a B story.
Yeah.
And also you really want everyone to be so invested and rooting for Leonard. And that's why over time, then it grows.
Yeah.
And then also for the first whatever seasons, Raj can't talk in front of girls. So there's just like this literal like, okay, that's a rule. How are we going to unwind that rule?
Right. At least that's why we got the video game segment in the very beginning of this to get them involved in that, because we don't see them a lot through the rest of the episode. So I miss these guys. I was like, it's a good episode, but I want to see more Raj and Wolowitz in the end. All right, are you ready to play a game?
Oh my gosh.
Unless there's anything else about this episode you want to tell me about that we'll be shocked to know.
I think that the difficult thing to remember is that when this episode was made, everyone thought it could just get canceled, right? Like we had an episode, we had an order for 13.
Okay.
And we were also like about to go on strike.
Yeah.
People were talking about strike. And how would that affect the show?
Right.
What would be going on? And so there was a sense of just so much uncertainty, and you think, and it's funny to the audience, but we don't know what's going to happen when it's on Mondays at 8:30,
right?
On CBS, and what the ratings are going to be, and kind of all that stuff. So it's like hard to remember. You're like, oh, well, this is one of the first episodes of this thing that goes on forever,
right?
But certainly, like back then, and Chuck, despite having 2.5 Men on at the same time, never took anything for granted, and was always like, yeah, this could go away, this could do it. So you're making your best effort. Everyone's making their best effort every single moment. And then you go on to the next episode, but you still won't know. Yeah. You still won't know.
You still don't know. And that's why Adam Faberman had so many T-shirts on hand. And just in case. It wasn't just for Chuck. It was just the stress of the whole damn operation to make sure that this would, it's exactly right. Okay. So we're going to play a game called Would You Rather Science Edition.
Okay, great.
All right. So there's really no wrong answer. I hope so. You're not going to fail at this. Totally fun. Okay. Would you rather be able to predict the weather with 100% accuracy or control it?
So definitely control it, because we're pretty close to 100% accuracy. Like, we're getting out, and the new AIs have gotten this even further out. So I feel like that's going to get better and better. But controlling the weather would be good. Although, from a litigation standpoint, it's a hassle, because you make it rain someplace, which is good for the crops, but bad for a wedding. Right. So I think it's a giant hassle, but still worth it.
It's a lot of pressure. Yes. You need a lot of T-shirts to do that role. Okay. Would you rather be able to walk through walls or become invisible?
Yeah, so that's right. So that's a variation of the invisible or fly thing. And I think the answer is always invisible.
Yeah.
Because what can you get from walking through walls that you can't get from invisible?
Exactly.
And if you can walk into something invisible, you can't walk out with it.
Agreed.
So you take the gold bar and then you get stuck on the way back.
Agreed. Okay, would you rather be able to breathe in space or never need to sleep?
Wow. So that's really a toss-up. I think if you could breathe in space, you might never have the chance to do it, right? Like you can breathe in space, but now you have to convince somebody to send you to space. Can anybody else breathe in space? What happens when you breathe in space? And then there also could be a little extra curly cue of like, oh, but your body still blows up. Like there's still no guarantee for existence. So I think the not sleeping thing would just give you more life. And so that would be good.
I love sleep so much, but I wish I could pause sleep so
Yes.
that I could get as much of it as I wanted, but time wouldn't move. So then I could have more time in the day to do things. But
I was obsessed with that idea. There's a movie from like the early 80s about a guy who's got a clock and you can stop it and you stop time. And that always really appealed to me.
Okay. Would you rather have a time machine that only goes back in time or forward?
Oh, wow. So that's another question you probably can't bring anything back. So if you, from a business opportunity standpoint, going forward and bringing technology and bringing that back, that seems pretty cool. But the problem is, do other people have the same time machine? So anyway, you can get into the weeds on that one. And then going back, I think is not as cool as everyone thinks, because say you go back to like, okay, you're going back to when Julius Caesar stabbed, right? You're still not going to get in there. You don't speak Latin. There's like all these, you're probably going to get killed.
Yeah.
Right? Or like thrown in with the lions or something like that. So I think going back in time is overrated.
You've really thought this through. I'm very impressed. Very impressed.
These were the things that did come up in the writer's room.
That did.
Right.
I can imagine. I'm sure it did. Okay. Would you rather be a wizard with weak spells or a superhero with unreliable powers?
Oh, I think unreliable powers. Well, boy, that's tough. I could work with either, but the unreliable powers seems less frustrating. The weak powers seems more frustrating. You're just like, I can make your shoe move a little. Like it's cool. It's kind of a parlor trick. I think I'd like the lottery quality of something big happening.
Or how about, would you rather be a wizard or a superhero?
I think a wizard gives you more flexibility. Like you've got more spells and stuff like that. And a superhero is more just like you do your thing. So you're Aquaman and then you can't fly, unless you're Superman, who's got too much stuff.
Right.
But I think you get put in a box if you're stereo. You get kind of like, that's your lane.
You're going the wizard route.
Yeah, I'm going to go wizard route.
I love that. Okay. Would you rather live in a world with no internet or a world with no cars?
Wow. So from a carbon standpoint, that's a really interesting question, because you might think that with no cars, that's a good GPT question. I think you might be able to solve the climate crisis with no cars right away. However, with the rise of AI, you're going to have more problems potentially with this power thing. So I'm going to say no cars.
Okay. I like it. Would you rather have a spacesuit that lets you survive anywhere in space or a device that translates every alien language?
So the alien language presupposes you're in contact with aliens. So I think that unless it was a device that translates any alien languages, but you never meet any aliens. So that'd be like in a spacesuit, but you never do that.
Right.
So I have a lot of follow-up questions to these things. So kind of it's all in the details.
I love that. Okay. Would you rather live in a world where robots replace all jobs? This sounds terrible.
You mean 2026?
I mean, right, exactly. Or where everyone has a universal basic income?
That's great because people advocate for both. So, universal basic income, like kids would be able to eat food. There are a lot of hungry kids in America, so they'd be able to do that for sure. For sure that.
I think so too. Okay, final one. Would you rather meet your future self 50 years from now or your past self from 10 years ago?
So that's another thing, which is like, well, if it's 50 years, that means I lived 50 years.
Right.
So I'm taking that hands down just because that means I'm going to live for another 50 years. So that's like a hedge, which I really appreciate. And then I would be very interested in what my future self says. And I think it probably would just be, you should have chilled out more. You should have just been, it's fine. No matter what happens, it's all fine.
It'll all be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's all going to be okay.
Yeah, if we can get the wisdom from our future selves, I would be all for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it is such a pleasure to have you on, and can't wait to bring you back for future episodes.
Well, thank you very much. And also, thank you for doing this. Thank you for writing the book.
Gosh.
Thank you for crowning this 50 years from now. If I have great-grandchildren, and they're just going to be like, boop, boop, or they're not even going to type. They're just going to be like, hey, Alexa, what's the play? Tell me everything about my alive grandfather because he's been 50 years.
Well, that's very sweet. And I thank Chuck Lorre because without Chuck Lorre, there would be no book that I would be doing. So, so thank you to him. That's for sure. But thank you for coming on. You're great.
Thanks.
This podcast was produced by Warner Brothers Unscripted Television in partnership with Max.